I'm used to having, the computer and then the screen where I can see what's coming up and all of that. But right now I can't. So I'm trusting you're seeing the,
we're seeing a split screen. You're sharing your screen with the altars in the world and the hoodoos on the picture.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, see that.
So, so the two chapters that we had set for the this week. First one was all about getting lost, and Christina, I think this is the first time you've joined in this discussion, right?
Yes,
so,
but this is my second time reading the book as a study.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Well, good.
yeah.
So, what I generally do, and I'll run through this relatively quickly, is just sort of reprise what was going on in the chapter, and then we can interact with it however we want. There are always a couple of discussion questions that we can ignore or use as we see fit, and that's fine. But Taylor begins this chapter with this wonderful sort of description of walking on cow paths, and what happens when you leave the cow path, and it opening you up to the unpredictable, whether it's you can't see where the snakes are, or you can't see where the gopher holes are. But that cows are energy conservant. They don't want to meander. They want to get from point A to point B. And so those paths become really well traveled and beaten down. And clearly one of the points is that we do the same thing. And then she talks about deciding, to get lost on the way home from work, to do something different. And we can talk about this. I've had some experience with that. And then it sort of gets deeper into this, it takes the wilderness in a different direction when she starts talking about these not so benign ways of getting lost, whether it's a divorce or a death or getting unexpectedly seriously sick or losing a job. And that's being lost. And I think that description is really pretty apt. She talks a little bit about what this quote, God does some of God's best work with people who are truly seriously lost. Abraham and Sarah, just picking up and going, and God says go, and they say, oh yeah, fine, whatever, not knowing where they're going. The Israelites and the Exodus, the experience of the Babylonian exile, being lost, Jesus in the wilderness. And had she written this book this year, she probably would have added COVID and the COVID experience of being lost. And, proposes that there's great vulnerability in being lost because you learn how perishable you are when you are no longer in control. And that's one of those things about being lost. I don't know where we're going. I don't know what's coming. And there's danger there, or potential danger. So that potential danger translates into your own sense of perishability. She does this bit on Ash Wednesday. And I loved her description of ashes as a taste of death. My experience of Ash Wednesday has always been quite profound, but I'd never thought of it in this way. But she points out that it's incredibly countercultural in a society that focuses on spiritual success, that Ash Wednesday demands that you look at your failures. So is that a recognition of being lost? Talks about this accident of having this accident riding a horse and finding herself lost in the hospital. Again, an experience of not being in control, but then experiencing hospitality. I'd never thought about hospital and hospitality as coming from that same root. And that was, I enjoyed that. Um, she relates this experience or this word or concept. My French is not good, but flaneur, going where the wind blows. Again, you're not in control. The wind is blowing you in different places. She talks about wilderness. I mean, it's kind of the subtitle of the chapter, but I think loss of control, I think, becomes a huge subtext. Anything can become a spiritual practice once you're willing to approach it that way, once you let it bring you to your knees. Again, the loss of control going on. And then this piece that she talks about in terms of the GPS system, that we want to get from point A to point B, and getting lost is undervalued. As I was coming up to the SALT today, I plugged it into the maps program. I know how to get here. This is not a big deal, but I wanted to see where it was going to direct me. And it didn't direct me the way I came. It assumed, and not without reason, that, I-70 was perfectly passable, but I didn't want to deal with that traffic mess where all of the mudslides had been. And I thought, and I'm not in a hurry, so I'll go through Aspen and Independence Pass, where I'd never been before. Now, was I lost? No, but it was a new way to go. But, we want to go from point A to point B. And I decided, oh, no, I want to do something a little different. And then she sort of ends with this assertion: you can get lost anywhere in all kinds of ways. So that was sort of my summary of that chapter. And I'm really eager to hear what you all got out of that, or questions or anything like that. Again, there are only 3 of us, so we can do whatever we want. It makes it really easy tonight.
Well, I guess my main, the whole concept of getting lost, or being in a situation that seems lost to you, whether it's health or whatever, is pretty human experience. But I'm not sure what her punchline for the chapter was, other than you get lost. You can be a spiritual experience, I guess, is what she's saying.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Christina.
I would say I kind of got that it wasn't so much, part of it was being lost, but what you're able to find when you're lost. Not just the path back or a new path, but even yourself. When she brings up Abraham and Sarah leaving the comforts that they've had and being in the wilderness, and then the Israelites being in the wilderness, the sense of faith and finding that better place after the experiences of the wilderness, to where they could truly be thankful and show that gratitude, and not just show it, but feel the gratitude for having come through it. I had someone that said to me in a conversation on Saturday that if we look at it, that something didn't happen to me, but for me. So it didn't happen to us, but for us. Mm-hmm. Then it really, as I was reading through this in preparation, it hit even more that sense of loss, rather it's the job or losing a sense of a community due to moving to something new, and being willing to take that risk and go out in the wilderness, in whatever form that comes in for each of us, is happening for us. And what are we going to learn, and what are we going to receive out of that sense?
Yeah, I think I would, I certainly agree with that. And I've alluded to this already, is that she uses the image of wilderness, but I think, in sort of in the biblical use of that term, we think of wilderness as the desert or something like that. But really, what wilderness meant whether it's in Hebrew or Greek, is a place that was sort of uncivilized, uncultivated. And so you're in a place that isn't under our control. And like as I've said, I could have easily said, this is getting lost is about losing control. And what do you learn? Picking up a little bit on what Christina said, what do you learn when you aren't in control, when not everything fits your pattern, your schedule, all of those kinds of things. So her story about being lost in the hospital, everybody else was taking care of her. She couldn't do anything about it. Her capacity to be in control was gone. And so what you learn when all of a sudden you're that vulnerable, this quote from pages 82 and 83, anything can become a spiritual practice once you let it bring you to your knees. To be taken to your knees is that sort of loss of control, or to flip it over the other direction, to submit yourself to something greater than you. Islam, the word Islam has to do with submission, and so the practice of prayer for Muslims is very physical. It has to do with prostrations, multiple prostrations every prayer session, at least 15 to 25. And when you are down on your face, kneeling down in your arms, you are totally submissive to whatever is out there. We don't have that. I mean, that's so countercultural to American sensitivities that we want to control. This is what we can do. We can control the world. And so that's one of those things in Islam that I'm kind of envious of. And what I see for a lot of folks in churches, including Good Shepherd, at various points in the service, some will stand during the confession, others really want to kneel during confession and sort of put themselves in a position of submission or humility. Same thing with the prayer of consecration. I'm not arguing for one over the other. They're both perfectly valid. But, for some people, that bodily posture says, I'm not in control, or I sort of say that there is something out there that is bigger than me. And so I think, if to your question, Whit, about, the punchline, that's the punchline I get, is that we're not in control. And can we recognize those points in our experience when we aren't in control, and recognize that maybe that there's something coming from God to us in that experience. My thought. I can't hear you, Whit.
Well, thank you, because there was noise in the background, so I put it on mute, but
Yep.
Thank you for mentioning that. Human nature being what it is, one of our primal instincts is to survive. If you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's survival, and that's food, and then it's companionship or love, and he goes on down. But it's been a long time since I studied Maslow. But anyway, so really, as human beings, that's we try not to get lost.
That's right.
We try not to make anything uncertain. We want to do things that have a predictable outcome, that that we're doing the right thing. It's interesting though, looking back, for someone that's fairly old, looking back at life and saying, boy, when I was 30, 40, I thought I'm doing exactly the right thing. And now I look back and say, you could have done things a lot different. So it's just, there's degrees of getting lost. Sometimes you think you're absolutely on the right track, but you're really lost. So what can you recall anything from the group yesterday that talked about this in terms of their reaction to the chapter?
Yeah, and you've probably heard this story before because I think Jim has told it more than once. But Jim Wolfe recounted, and I've had this, and now I've had this experience too, and maybe you both have as well, is losing your job, and that not because you wanted it, right? You're laid off or whatever. And while Jim seems to sort of say that this hits men harder than women, I don't know that that's the case. But he was saying that so much of what guys do is tied up in their work, and when that is pulled away from them or taken away from them in a violent way, like you're laid off, then all of a sudden your own sense of who you are and where you are in the world is just taken away from you. And how do you deal with that? And I had that experience several years ago. But what Jim also said was that in looking back in hindsight, hindsight provides a different way of evaluating the experience, and that the biblical material, he didn't talk about this, but I will. The biblical material is all about hindsight. Nobody was sitting there with a video camera saying, "Oh, this is what it looked like when we crossed the Red Sea." Everybody, they're all looking back and making sense of what happened in hindsight of this wilderness experience and say, this is what it has led us to. And so, that was, I think, at least in this particular chapter, that was Jim's comment there that many people could identify with, was really that sense of getting lost more than, driving around town and being in an unfamiliar place. What do you do? Or hiking, and what do you do when you get lost? There was less of that experience and more of the existential stuff of living in the modern world and having things taken away from you, like a job or something like that.
Sure.
That was probably the main piece.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell on this too long, but I just share a little thing. When I was flying in the Air Force, you never admitted you were lost. You only admitted you were temporarily disoriented. So,
yeah, I don't know if you were in part of this discussion at some point, Whit, but I was talking with some musicians at Good Shepherd. Maybe it was in a staff meeting with Connie, and somebody talked about hitting a wrong note. And I said, we musicians never hit wrong notes. We are improvising. Sometimes it's a successful improvisation, and sometimes it's less successful.
I can relate.
Yeah, well, yeah, any musician can certainly relate to that. So yeah, I think disoriented, but getting this none of us, if we have, or it doesn't do this very much anymore, but the old GPS systems, nobody wanted to hear recalculating. Now we get Siri or whoever it is telling us return to the route. We have a culture that says you don't want to be lost. And we have a God that says, you know what happens when you're lost? You might see me in a way that you didn't before.
Yeah.
She brings up in the chapter, and others have brought up the job loss and stuff. I've had a few experiences with that, with different career fields and changes and stuff, but two of the most significant were, each of them occurred while I was 8 months pregnant.
Oh, wow.
First time with Katie and the second time with Aaron. With Katie, it was the company closed down. They just went bankrupt. And so no benefit, nothing. And then with Aaron, it was unexpected. But each of those times, what it allowed because I was laid off beforehand, that once I finished being out from under doctor's care was 4 months worth until I found the next position that was right, was to be home with my girls. And I wouldn't change, as stressful as it was to be without insurance at that one, because the insurance was with my company, and to go through all of that, I wouldn't change those 4 months of being able to stay home, where I would have felt compelled at 6 weeks to go back to work.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, lost in a way, but I found an amazing time that I'll always treasure and bond with my daughters.
That's a neat story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. These two questions, we may have kind of addressed them. And we can go on if we want. I would, my experience, and I'll just sort of recount this. You both know. I was laid off from DU, and this was there was no expectation that this would happen. I expected I would retire from DU, having been a campus minister for 30 plus years, and that was my expectation. And so, just in terms of this first quote, I found things while I was lost that I might never have discovered if I'd stayed on the path. My path was campus ministry. I mean, that was exactly where I was going. It's what I had known. It was my world. And what I found, since then, is that there are things in one world that translate into another, and there might be just as equal joys in the other world as there were in the one that you thought was predictable and manageable and all of that kind of stuff. It was never my really, sort of my idea to be a parish clergyman. But what I found has been exactly the opposite of what my expectations were. So that thing of being lost and finding a new path, from my standpoint, I can really sort of see what she's saying there. But I was forced into being lost. This was not a chosen lostness, but I was forced into being lost. And then how do I get out of this wilderness? And I'm just going to segue to this second question really quickly, is, empathy, exercise muscles needed for radical trust. I kept being told by the bishop and all of the people in the bishop's office, don't worry, Gary, we got your back. Don't worry, Gary, we got your back. Don't worry, Gary, we got your back. I didn't know what my back was, but, and I just sort of had to sit back and say, okay, well, they got my back. We didn't know that it was Good Shepherd. They just said, we got your back. There are a lot of places, and I had to sort of sit back and say that. That was so hard, so hard. Let's transition to chapter 6 here. We've been lost in this chapter. Let's go to community, which again was given all of the stuff that was going on yesterday.
These were good chapters for this week, weren't they?
Oh, were they ever? And so she starts out talking about introversion and extroversion, and being an introvert, or Martha being an introvert, and of course Barbara Brown Taylor says that she is. And she talks about these early Christian ascetics, the Desert Fathers and Mothers. And when I was doing my graduate work, my doctoral advisor was an expert in this stuff. So it was fun to go back and see these names again, these names of these folks that I had spent time living with when I was in North Carolina. But she points out that, these guys and women lived off by themselves, but they couldn't live, entirely by themselves. They needed one another. And to save them from the temptation of believing in their own self-sufficiency. What an idol, what an idol. My self-sufficiency is such an incredible idol. And that's one of the ones that we are just, sort of brought up against in our current society. Goes on to say that we need someone to tell our stories to. I'm up here with this friend, and we tell our stories to each other. and it's such a great gift. When you've been a friend with somebody for a while, you spend a little time catching up, and then it's all of the stories, all of the various stories, either your own stories with each other, or stories that you think the other person's going to relate to, and it gets us out of ourselves. That thing there at the fourth bullet point.
Yeah, I was trying to look for that quote that one of the brothers in the Desert Fathers, one of them said to the other, and I can't find it, but it's something like, if you believe you've arrived, or then you're lost, or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or I think I mentioned yesterday, you've created a God in your own image when the God that you believe in hates all of the same people you do.
That's good. That is so good.
It's well,
the one thing you said, if you see a young monk by his own, if you see a young monk by his own will climbing into heaven, one elder said, take him by the foot and throw him to the ground, because what he is doing is not good for him. But I don't think that's another one though. It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Spiritual. Go ahead.
One of the issues I have with some denominations, other churches, is first of all, people go there to get the answers, and if you don't have any more questions, people that feel like they've arrived, they've got it all figured out, I feel sorry for them, because if you feel like you have all the answers, then you're not where you need to be.
And what happens, I absolutely agree with you. And what happens when something occurs for which your answer system doesn't work, then all of a sudden you're in the wilderness and you're lost without without a compass. So here these two chapters can kind of dovetail a little bit. There's no compass. Heart of spiritual work is to love the neighbor as the self, one who can spring you from the prison of yourself. And I go back to what I was saying earlier. I went home and I was in my own prison of myself. I don't want to hear anything about that meeting. And Susan said, no, I'm going to tell you something. And that sprung me a little bit from the prison that I had created, and so that was a beautiful gift that she gave me unintentionally, in that sense that she sprang me from that prison that was myself. She goes on to talk, and I preached about this a week ago, I think, about like-minded clubs. Common interest keeps you together, but it keeps others out. And that cannot be the church. We're supposed to be inviting folks into this family, this community, this realm. And I really liked her idea of this spiritual practice of focusing on one of the human beings who usually sneak right past you, like the cashier. And she wrote this in the early to mid 90s, I think. Is that right, Christina? You said you read it before. I think it goes back that was before all of the self-checkout lines. And so now you don't have to deal with it. You don't have to deal with a cashier. You just get to deal with this machine that says, welcome, valued customer. And, so you don't even talk to the cashier. So how do we encounter people? How do we encounter people that are who are not, our inner circle, our family or our church community or something? How do we actually encounter folks? Being up here, I was just in a restaurant and, encountered a couple of the wait staff. They told us early on they were short-staffed, which is why they didn't hang around. And sort of our initial thing was, well, come on, you've got to help us. And rather than, I know, what's it like to be short-staffed? Well, they don't have the time to answer that question because they're trying to serve all of these tables. But what's that like? I thought, that's an interesting spiritual practice. Who has the time? This practice of encounter. And the philoxenia, the love of the stranger equals hospitality. I get so excited at Good Shepherd when I have the time, which was not last Sunday, but other times when I've had the time at the end of a service to greet people as they're coming out and to see somebody that I don't recognize, mask or no mask, and to, it's just great to see folks there and to welcome them. And Good Shepherd's pretty good at that overall. Nothing strengthens community like a common enemy. Oh my goodness, haven't we seen that?
Oh, I think I recall several studies in world civ, archaeology, and history on pulling together communities based on a common enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes,
Lots of paper writing on that one.
Yeah. And yesterday we, folks in that discussion brought up both what happened at 9/11, or actually 9/12, when everybody was united on the day after, but also the larger experience of World War II. And whether it was the Japanese or whether it was the Axis enemies, we knew, we as Americans at least, or we and the Allies knew who the enemy was, and it was really easy to cooperate. But we've kind of lost that. COVID provided it, and then it became politicized. Whether it's vaccines or whether it was, well, let's blame the Chinese or whatever, it just became politicized so quickly. So this is a sociological truth. What happens when difference is demonized, same kind of thing. But she ends with this sort of a kind of a hopeful thing that, what we have most in common is not religion, because of course she's writing as a religious person out of a context of Christianity or Anglicanism. That's not what we have in common. But we have in common humanity. And I so saw that after 9/11 on the college campus. And when I was working with the other campus ministers, we weren't worried about who was Muslim, who was Hindu, who was Jewish, who was Christian, who was evangelical, who was all of those. We did, we were just trying to hold everything together. And it was one of the most rewarding times of my professional career as a campus minister, was those few days. And being able to call up the carillonneur at UC Berkeley, they only played the carol on there at certain times, and a lot of times it was recorded. And I called him up and I said, we're going to do this service at this time. I would like you to toll the bell and I will give you the signal. He said, happy to do it. It was one of those things when people wanted to do something for the common good. And at that point, there wasn't necessarily a common enemy, it was the common good. And how do we emphasize that? And she's not raising this question, but how do we emphasize the common good or the greater good to the point where that becomes the motivating factor for people moving ahead, rather than the motivation is to defeat an enemy? I think that's a challenging question. And then, her assignment here is to get over yourself, which was kind of like the last chapter, but in a different language. So, other thoughts on this chapter that came out of your reading of it rather than my bullet points?
Well, of course, love your neighbor as yourself. And this is one of our basic tenets as Christians. That is hard to do. If you really think about it, we could go back to the basics. Who's my neighbor? Jesus explained it pretty well. But love your neighbors as you would yourself. That's a tall order. And I'm not sure I do that good a job at that.
I agree. It's a really tall order because it assumes that you love yourself. And some of us don't do that very well, which I think is probably why we treat our neighbors so poorly.
When you were talking about the cashier, something popped in my mind, and I don't know why these things do, but recycling. I try not to recycle little bitty pieces of paper or dirty stuff or stuff that I know, because there's somebody that's got to go through all that stuff. And I'll never meet them. I know they don't get paid enough. And I know they're probably struggling, but they don't need some doofus putting stuff in a recycle bin that is not usable or is dirty or can't be recycled. So that the story, her story about the cashier reminded me of that. It's a small thing, but particularly since I heard, we talked about before that only 10% of what we get recycled gets only 10% of what we recycle gets recycled, in the United States. That's pretty telling.
Yeah.
They got to cull a lot of stuff out.
Mhm.
Yeah. My daughter works at King Soopers, and she does what she does now is called the click list. That's where you call in, and then these people go and pull everything off the shelf and then take it out to your car. And she talks about how angry people get when you, as the click list person, had to make a substitution because they wanted Hunt's ketchup, but you were out of Hunt's ketchup. So you substituted Heinz ketchup. And they say, I'm not going to take that. I wanted Hunt's. And they get really bent out of shape about that kind of thing. Or her experience of going into the back and pallets not being distributed. I mean, I don't think about that when I go to the grocery store, and so who those folks are in every industry who do all of this stuff that we take for granted, and what their life is like, Do they have an aging parent? Do they have a child with special needs? Is their marriage in trouble? I mean, are they coming up against a significant birthday? I mean, we don't know any of that, and we treat them as an other, And so you're right. I think this the cashier is a great model. That said, I try and avoid the cashier's line just because it's usually quicker to go through self-serve.
Yeah, I don't. I kind of silently protest against self-serve unless I'm really in a hurry and the lines are real long. I'd rather go to cashier.
That's a great spiritual practice. Go ahead.
Back to curbside pickup. We've been using it for over a year now at King Soopers here in Castle Rock, and occasionally we will run in and get something, put our mask on, whatever. But for the most part, we've been doing curbside pickup. And the best story yet is Dorothy one day ordered 9 Brussels sprouts. I got home, we had 9 pounds. I had to go up and down the street trying to give away Brussels sprouts.
And everybody was so excited because you weren't trying to give away zucchini.
Yep, yeah, right. But no, I generally always try to tip those folks and thank them for being there because they're doing something that at this time I don't care to do. And we get home and we look at the substitution. Well, first of all, you can check no substitutions. So, which Dorothy does. So we get home a lot, or I ask for the invoice while they're loading, and I look at it. And there's usually a few things they say they're out of or whatever. And, so what? The other day, there was a couple of things they were out of, that were on the list they were out of. And I had to go back close to King Soopers for something. So I went in and I found 2 of the items that one of them was definitely nothing on the shelf, but I found 2 of the items that they said they couldn't find. Now they could have stocked after they picked, our order. I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. And my son, Greg is now working at Yaya's, and
Really?
Yeah. He's apprenticed to the chef at Yaya's.
Woo.
And he comes home every so often with these stories about unreasonable customers.
Oh yeah.
And the stories, and the stories are all they're believable, which is sad, but
Mm.
there are stories that point to privilege, you know,
Sure.
and here's this, you know, here's this, I'm not just talking about my son, but all of the people who are back behind in the back of the house making food, doing all of these kinds of things. And because of supplies chain shortage, you know, they don't have as much kale as they do some or whatever, you know, and they have to do this sort of stuff on the fly. And people said, well, that's not what I ordered. And you're charging us, you know, $37.50 for this entree, and it's too salty, and whatever it is, but this absolute over the top um, sort of objectionable.
Yeah.
And anyway, so yeah, privilege has its privileges and it also has its challenges. And I think a lot of people forget how to deal with the folks who are
Christina, we've been talking too much.
Yeah,
Oh, no. I've been listening. They're
thank you.
all very true and valid. And I think in the way of, you know, spiritual practice is what she's trying to get to. It
Right,
just goes to demonstrate exactly what we need to be mindful of. And then also putting into action, which kind of leans to one of the things I highlighted in the reading, was a quote from one of the Desert Fathers, Abbot Pastor, that really just struck me. It was, if you have a chest full of clothing and you leave it for a long time, the clothing will rot inside it. It is the same with the thoughts in our heart. If we do not carry them out by physical action, after a long while, they will spoil and turn bad. So here we are, all these ideas, and we study. And I think her point is to get out in the world and do it. You know, even in the littlest of steps, rather that's saying hello to the cashier and making eye contact and wishing them a good day as you leave once they've completed the transaction. Or, you know, in my case, it's going through Starbucks drive-through on the way to work on the occasions where I have to go into the office, and, you know, remembering to look up, not just grab my coffee and say bye-bye and drive away, but to actually look at the person working and recognize that they're in there in a small space with other people, and, you know, just so I can have my morning coffee on my way to work.
Yeah,
Because I didn't have time in my schedule, you know, getting up and making it myself. You know,
Yeah.
so I recognize it's a privilege to be able to get the coffee. And I'm thankful when they have the type, you know, because my local one doesn't always have the blonde roast due to the shortages. So I can be thankful when they do. So yeah, I think it's all, yeah, you know, privilege. We've gotten way too used to things. We've gotten way too used to being upset and expressing our outrage onto somebody else's day and their hard work versus finding a better way to express that we're upset or that things need to change. And I'm sorry, you know, kale or spinach, I don't know. I mean, personally, I'm okay with either, but I guess if you don't like baby spinach in your salad and you prefer kale,
yeah.
a little irritating, but it's just an irritant. It's not, you know, it's not some of our justice issues and things. And I think we've forgotten that with some of the COVID issues, is we've gotten isolated.
I don't know if I push it just to COVID. I think that, you know, as a society, I mean, the tagline, first world problems,
Oh, yes,
predates COVID, you
it
know,
does.
and you know, so I think that, you know,
I
what
think
you're,
it's new problems now that we
yeah,
focus
we've
on,
got a different set. That's right. But it's
but
still
still
kind of the
first world
same thing.
problems.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Um,
it's the objection on vaccines when you look at the numbers, and there are still communities and countries who haven't even been given a full chance to vaccinate and want to be.
Right.
And we're, we have all these level of objections. And I was like, okay, if you don't want to, that is your choice. But, it doesn't need to be this polarized
Right.
and political when there are people out there that would like to, and due to their location, haven't had the opportunity yet.
Yeah, there's other countries around the world who've got to be looking at us and what's happening. Just as since you mentioned, shaking their heads saying, give them to us, give them to us.
Yeah, right. So it's just about 8 o'clock.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about being an introvert and or religious rituals of other faith traditions. Again, I pull these questions off of out of some suggested conversation points for this book, and we don't have to deal my usually the conversations that we've been having both on Sunday mornings and on Monday evenings have been rich enough. We have not had to revert to these, but we did have quite a long conversation yesterday about introvert and extrovert and how that has played out in people's lives. And and some folks yesterday did talk about religious rituals of other faith traditions. I don't know if there's anything in those two sort of bullet points that you want to respond to.
Well, first of all, thank you for taking time on your vacation to still meet us and kick things around. I'm really
Very appreciative.
really enjoying the book.
Well, that's good. Let me just say quickly, what I'm not taking time on my vacation. What I'm doing is taking advantage of the fact that I don't have to be in person, so that I could leave Denver early, so that I didn't have to drive up to the frying pan first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
So this was a weird combination of vacation and personal time and all that. So anyway,
encountering other people as a necessary spiritual practice. None of us are on this journey alone. And so that in itself means to grow spiritually, you have to have help. At least I do. And I've had help. I've had wonderful mentors and people that may not have been mentors, but they may have said one thing that has just stayed with me, that type of thing. So that comes from other people.
It does. I think through our visioning process in the last year and discovering as Good Shepherd who and what we wanted to be, we put our value into relationships and community. And, I think that says a lot of what we're yearning for and feel that other people are yearning for is the opportunity to encounter others, to grow in those practices.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just, COVID has imposed such a challenge to do that. We can't have coffee hour in the way that we've done it before. We haven't been able to do these other kinds of things that we were able to do sort of pre-COVID. And that vision really reflects a pre-COVID reality that we would like to make happen post-COVID, but we're being prevented from doing that in so many ways. And that's just so heartbreaking for so many of us, that we would really like to be able to have the easy, free-flowing interaction that we used to have. And there are too many people who are concerned about about COVID. Too many people who, even when they're there, they want to get out quickly to minimize their contact. Other folks who are reluctant to be in person. The limitations that Zoom, you can have 20 people who hang around after church, but you can't have 17 different conversations going on because Zoom only allows one. without sort of assigning breakout rooms. So we've been really limited, and that's just, like I said, it's just really heartbreaking that we haven't been able to sort of live out that vision in a way that I think that we would really like to. So.
Okay, well, good luck fishing. What's the hatch at this point? Is there no hatch?
Oh, I was just in the fly shop a few hours ago, just before it closed at 5, and I asked what the river was doing, and he said, "Take everything you have." It's everything from stoneflies to pale morning duns to midges to to caddis. He says it's just all over the place on both the frying pan and on the roaring fork. So just, he said, be prepared for everything. The nice thing is apparently I don't know if this means anything to you, Christina, but the frying pan is, the river is controlled by what they release from the Ruedi Dam. So they can
Okay.
control the flow, how much water is rushing down the river. And they're dropping the flow tonight. So it will be lower, which will make the fishing a little easier because you can get into the water in ways that you couldn't
Mhm.
today. So who knows? We're just, it's fishing. It's not catching, it's fishing. And
I'm not
it's-
familiar with fly fishing, but grew up fishing rivers and just south of lower parts of dams and stuff all over Tennessee, Arkansas.
oh yeah,
Kentucky.
yeah.
So
But I will tell you that the colors here are spectacular.
Oh, I bet.
So standing in the middle of a river, swinging a fly stick, and looking at reds and greens and yellows and oranges, that's enough. That's balm for the soul. So
Erin and I are headed up, not this coming weekend, but the next, for her fall break. And I'm hoping that it's not too late in the season
I don't
with it
think so.
changing it. Okay, great.
You probably have another week, maybe a week and a half, but it's spectacular right now. So next week we're looking at chapters 7 and 8, living with purpose, which has to do with vocation. And then what I think that we're all going to find really difficult to do with is saying no. Saying no. And I'm up here theoretically on some kind of a Sabbath, and it's after this meeting is when that really begins. And can I say no to checking email? That's a spiritual discipline, So, anyway,
okay, good.
you guys are great. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Okay,
Bye-bye,
Christina,
Gary.
I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Whip.
Okay. Bye.